So our next segment has to do with the metric system and talking about the units that are involved in the metric system. The metric system is a standard system of measurement that scientists use that allows them to understand each other's data and replicate, in other words, repeat each other's experiments. And this idea of a standard system is actually very, very important. It is what allows me here in Pennsylvania to do some experiments that they do in other parts of the world or even other parts of my own country. By using the same system of measurement, it allows us to not have to use different pieces of equipment no matter where we are in the world. It also makes it easier for me to actually understand what they're talking about as I'm reading through them. So what exactly is a standard? When we talk about things being a standard, what is it? It is an exact quantity that people agree to use for comparison or for measurement. And the standards that we use in science are actually agreed upon by a committee that meets every so often in Paris, and they look at the different standards that we have and decide if any of them need adjustments. This system, while we think of it as something kind of recent, it's actually not. It was first adopted in the late 1700s. Now, the system that is currently in place was part of the improvement process that we did in the 1960s, and it's now called the International System of Units, or SI. So when we're really talking about the metric system, we're talking about much, much more than just typical metric measurements. It's this whole system of units called SI. So if you look at your paper, you actually have two data tables. And the top one has what's called direct measurements, and the bottom one has what are called derived measurements. If you look at the list of direct measurements, for instance, let's take a look at the length one there. I can use a ruler and measure length. Now, if you take a look down at the bottom one, the first one there is area. If you try to think of how we measure area, if you think about, let's say, calculating the area of a square, I have to take length times width, let's say, of a square. Okay, so I actually use the ruler, but then I have to perform a mathematical calculation. I can't simply use a single tool and have that measurement take place. And that's the difference between a direct measurement and a derived measurement. A direct measurement I can take directly from my measuring piece of equipment. A derived measurement, I actually have to use some sort of mathematical calculation in order to come up with the value. So here are the direct measurements that we use within the metric system. Length is a meter, mass is a kilogram, temperature is Kelvin, time is the second, amount of substance is the mole, electric current is the ampere, and luminous intensity is the candela. We are actually going to be working a lot with those first four in this class. The other ones I put on there simply because they are very common, and you will come in contact with them in other science courses that you will be working with. In the bottom table, these are our derived measurements. Area with the square meter, volume with the cubic meter, density, kilograms per cubic meter, pressure with the Pascal, energy with the joule, frequency of the hertz, and electric charge with the coulomb. We are going to be dealing in this class with volume, with density, and especially with energy. So those are kind of the three common ones that you will see throughout the course. Now, let me take a look at the volume one here for a second. A square meter, if you think about it in terms of size, is about the size of a fairly large size dishwasher. So obviously I don't have a measuring piece in my lab that is that large. So sometimes we actually take these and divide them down into smaller or group them together in larger quantities. For instance, with distance, if I'm measuring the length of a table, a meter is fine. If I'm measuring the width of a paper clip, a meter is kind of overkill, it's too big. But if I'm measuring the distance from here to Philadelphia, a meter is far too small. So in order to keep these measurements manageable, we actually can put prefixes that either group these standard units together into larger bundles or quantities, or divide them down into units that are easier for us to work with. So let's take a look at these prefixes that we will see. Giga, okay, like a gigabyte, for instance, with computers, that means a billion. So a gigabyte has a billion bytes. A megabyte is another one you also hear a lot with computers. Mega means million, so a megabyte is a million bytes. Kilo, with like kilogram or kilometer, it means 1,000 of that base unit. Deci we don't see a lot, but every so often you do run across it. That means a tenth. Centi, you're probably very familiar with centimeter. That means a hundredth. So a centimeter is 1/100th of a meter. Another way to think of it is that you need 100 centimeters to equal a single meter. Milli is another one that you're probably familiar with. Milli means 1,000th. So a millimeter is 1/1000th of a meter. So I need 1,000 millimeters to equal a single meter. Micro, and that's actually a Greek letter. If you look up above with milli and with mega, I've already used capital M and lowercase m. I can't use either of those again for the prefixes, so I had to use something different. That means millionth. You'll hear the term micrometer or micron in biology because a micron is about the length of a standard cell. Nano is also one that you're probably familiar with, just with nanotechnology, and that means a billionth. So a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter. Now, in the next video in this series, we're actually going to take a look at your metric steps paper and kind of put these in relationship to each other so that you can kind of understand how they work and also how we can convert different metric units into